Okay, why don't we begin? I know we have a number of items before us tonight. I'm sorry, I just wanted to get organized here, but could the clerk please call the roll? This is a meeting of the Finance Subcommittee to discuss a number of items: cash policy, investment policy, and in FY20 or management letter FY 2010, probably 29 as well. Could the clerk please call the roll?
Counselor Elliott?
Here.
Counselor Broderick?
Here.
Councilman Mendonça?
Here.
3 present.
3 present. Thank you. Why don't we go? Why don't we address the cash policy, literally cash, the receipt of cash, and the policy that is put in place as a result of incidences at the clerk's office. I believe it's September 7th. We received a communication. We received a communication from the city auditor relative to this. So, do you want to? Go ahead, Mr. Moses.
I'd like to correct the record. That was not put in place as a result of the city clerks. We had cash policies in place prior to that. We just codified that. That was in the works well before.
Okay, Mr. Moses, let's not get into a discussion of semantics, okay? Because there was no formal policy in place. There was no written formal policy in place. Is that the correct terminology? But we're here to discuss it, and I think it's important that we discuss it. It's just been communicated to all department heads in a formal manner in September, correct? No other department had a formal written policy on the receipt of cash as far as this communication is concerned, but
We've had written communications with specific departments, including the clerk's department, for years.
okay, so why don't we move into it? Why wasn't it followed, or what is the policy that was sent to us recently?
That policy is an update of policies that we'd had in place with individual departments for years. We felt it was time to bring out a written general policy for all departments, and that's why that was in the works. Again, that was in the works. We started working on this written policy probably in April or May, maybe.
Okay, so you've been working on it in April or May.
I think if I may, Mr. Chairman,
That's
with
good.
regards to the cash policy that you have before you, that's the policy of the city with regards to cash management. And we'd be happy to. I think that my understanding was that the purpose of the Finance Committee taking it up was to review the policy and ask questions regarding that policy and any questions you may have regarding that matter.
That's exactly it. And I'm just reading the communication, Mr. Moses, from the auditor regarding the motion that I made on Munis and a motion Council Mercy made on policy procedure. And you said it was finalized and distributed on September 7th. So that's where the September 7th came. So in my mind, maybe there was a written policy, maybe it was informal, maybe it was, to me, until something is written in place and there are proper procedures in writing, that tells me there's a formal policy in place. And if you're going to codify it now, that's even better. But as far as I'm concerned, that according to this, there was no formal policy in place. Maybe it was, but regardless, moving forward.
Well, exactly. I think if we could, we'd be happy to. Be happy to take any questions the council has, the subcommittee has regarding this policy. And
Madam Auditor, do you want to go through this? And then, because people should know, it's not just the auditor, it's not just the treasurer. It's really a between banks, the treasurer, and the auditor, the general ledger, the treasurer books, and bank statements. That is where the process and the procedure lies. And I'm glad that we had it. We have it now, and hopefully what took place will not take place again. So, Madam Auditor, if you'd like to go through the policy that's in place?
Absolutely. Well, basically, this is just, like you said, a codification. When you were talking about the city clerk's office, when they in fact brought Munis in and they started entering into Munis directly, then policies and procedures were put in place in the clerk's office. How they entered into Munis, how they entered into batches, how it integrated with the treasurer's office. So I believe that all these procedures were in place, but we just made a central location and a central policy that starts from departments all the way through to the reconciliation. It's a document that has been needed, and we finally put it into place. It took actually 2 or 3 years. Treasurer McGurl actually started this, and we all sat down and went through it to make sure it made sense, and that's why it took so long to get it distributed to the departments.
Perhaps it would be
Mr.
worthwhile.
Manager?
Mr. Chairman, perhaps it would be worthwhile for the, Mr. Moses or Ms. Wright to describe the policy and what specific goals are within that policy.
Sure. Sure. Basically, every department is responsible for their own cash and how they take it in. They're all responsible to give cash receipts for everything. Even if they're, at this point in time, if they're giving away a service, my recommendation to them is to actually put a cash receipt, even if no cash is taken. So we can start to with city start to look at exactly what's going on in each department. It makes sense to look at every transaction. Although we look at cash receipts constantly and how they're coming into departments, you want to look at it from both sides of the ledger. Excuse me. So, a department will take in cash, they will issue a cash receipt, they will actually itemize every single day, every receipt they take in, why they take it in, whether it's cash, whether it's a check. They'll take that on a daily basis and turn it over to the treasurer's office. As soon as it hits 250, they'll bring it to the treasurer's office. The treasurer's office is the recipient of all the cash. The only departments that actually take in cash and bring it to the bank themselves are the larger departments that have controls in place. The food services department, they have their own little debit card thing going on, so they're allowed to go to the bank. They give the receipt along with a description of everything to the treasurer once a week. And again, all the garages do their own receipts. They now have, with the new system in place, they actually get a readout of how much was taken in on each of the parking spaces. So that's enclosed when they turn it over to the treasurer's office. From that point, the treasurer's office reconciles the cash that comes in from each department, looks at it, posts it to the cash book, posts it to Munis. Once they're satisfied that everything's reconciled, they'll send the records over in a journal over to my office. The assistant auditor makes sure everything is in order, make sure everything's in place. Copies of everything get sent over to my office. We look at it. If everything's fine, we post it to the general ledger. On the treasury side of the ledger, what they do is reconcile the cash book to the bank statements, and from there, the cash book to the general ledger. That's kind of it in a nutshell. Reader's Digest version.
Okay. Questions from the subcommittee, Councilor Mendonça?
So for now, for any department receives cash, they're going to give out these numbered receipts.
Correct.
Now, what controls are there on those? I mean, is a record kept of what numbers they get and
Yes.
analysis of what numbers you get turned in?
I'll be doing tests in all the departments. Like, as it stands right now, the city clerk's office is sending me over a report weekly, and I check it against the general ledger. They have receipt books, they're in sequence, I have the numbers written down, and that's the way we plan on moving in the future.
Now, is the treasurer's office supposed to do that as they receive it, or is that something your office does?
It's actually the treasurer's office, but I'm the auditor, so we both look at it. The more eyes, the better.
Okay. So this means that now anyone that walks into a city department, pays cash, should get a receipt. Even if
Correct.
they write a check, they're supposed to get a receipt?
Correct.
So that you can write down the method of payment, and what it was for, et cetera. Very good. So that's basically what this is going to enforce now.
Correct.
They may have been doing it in the past, but this
This
is going to
is-
require them to do it.
Set in stone now.
Okay.
The treasurer's office, though, will give you the receipt that comes off the system, or actually the stub of your bill, which is, again, pre-numbered.
Okay, thank you.
Council Broderick.
Thank you. Just one question, actually, is if a receipt is not issued, there's a mistake made, we all make mistakes, are there instructions to take that receipt and put it in the batch so that we keep all of the
Correct.
numbers? If numbers are missing, we know, or if receipts are missing, we know that there shouldn't be any receipts missing, I guess, is the bottom line. They all should be accounted for, whether
Yes,
it
they-
says void or whatever you instruct them to do,
That's
so that we
exactly
have
right.
them all? Okay, thank you.
Void, put back in the book, 2 pieces. The
Okay,
reason it got voided.
perfect, thank you.
So prior to this policy being formalized in September 7th, had you conducted any analysis, or did you do any review in the clerk's office, or which is what you're doing now? Prior to that,
Correct.
that was not being conducted by you or,
Okay.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
Sending out questionnaires, fraud risk assessment, reviewing all of them from all the departments, and analyzing the risk of fraud. And that was a low exposure department.
Okay, what about the other departments? Have you looked into what the procedure is, what the system, have you done any analysis? Have you done any reports on, any findings in any other offices that
I-
receive cash?
I have not done a formal report. I am meeting with department heads.
Okay, so I just want to know, I mean, we're doing this now, have you been doing it in the past? Was it a practice in the past that you were doing it on a
Yes,
regular
but now I'm
basis?
doing it more often.
Okay, okay. And I suppose if there's no other questions on the cash policy, it's a good segue into, I think, the second item or another item, which is the management letter. Mr. Manager, do you have
No,
something?
the only comment, and actually, Mr. Chairman, I think it is an excellent segue, and maybe perhaps my comment ties in with your perspective as well. No system is entirely foolproof. We really, as we talked about the fraud risk, ultimately any system can be worked, and that's why it's important to be vigilant in this. It's interesting, while all of this was going on here at City Hall with regard to the clerk's office, there was a local bank, for instance, that had a similar situation in which money was disappearing, and it took several weeks for them to sort of tie in with that. And it was really the vigilance of in that particular case, a head teller that was able to track this down. It becomes more problematic in a department when it's the higher up people that we are running the risk. The ones that are responsible for identifying the fraud and or possible problems, and that is where the problems actually exist. So again, no system is foolproof, which is why it does require the auditor in this case, or the controls that we put in place to actually ensure that it doesn't occur, or that if it does occur, that it's caught as quickly as possible.
Excuse me, thank you, Mr. Manager. I agree, and we need to be vigilant, and I don't think we have been vigilant enough. And particularly in light of receiving this report, as we look at reconciliation that the auditor brought forward. And if I may, if there's no other questions from the subcommittee on the cash policy, it sort of ties in with a significant material weakness in internal controls highlighted not only this year, but in prior years, and I think it dates back to, I found a report back to 2003 and 2005, and this has been a long-standing problem, and that is cash reconciliation in the treasurer's office. So when we talk about being vigilant, I agree, Mr. Manager, but I think this is an area that's cited by our auditors that is a material weakness. It's an internal control system that needs to be addressed. It's been cited more than once, and it's, to me, it's a serious lapse in the system. And this report is, it's of concern, particularly when we look at what took place in the auditor's office. And I know we're talking about cash in the sense of currency and coin, but this has been a long-standing problem. I know that there was a reorganization that took place last year, and as I look at the report again, why does this continue to surface? We're talking about checks, and I mean, I can go through the list, but everybody has seen it. Some items haven't been reconciled they're between 1 and 3 years old. And again, many reports from years dating back saying this needs to be addressed. The auditor can't even do he can't even do an audit until the monthly reconciliations are done, until the books are closed. So it's almost an embarrassing issue that this has not been resolved as we're going through very difficult fiscal times. You know, how can we detect if there's any fraud if we're not reconciling on a monthly basis? So those are my concerns. It's a long-standing problem. I need to hear from you, Mr. Manager, and the CFO. I understand we don't have a treasurer. I would also like to know what the status or what the issue is with the assistant treasurer, and who's making these decisions. So the auditor, our independent auditor, can move forward and conduct the audit.
Well, if I may, I'll give...
Mr. Manager, with all due respect, this really is the purview of the city auditor. I mean...
Oh, okay. Well, you
she
said
is
you said you wanted to hear from the manager, so I was...
Okay, you know, because we did...
But
I'd like to hear from the auditor
if you'd rather not
first,
hear from the manager at this point in
and
time,
then I would like to hear about the reorganization and why it doesn't seem to have had the presumably the effect of addressing this problem, a significant
Well,
problem. So.
More in detail what the issues are. I think it's safe to go through.
Well, I think we know what the issues are. What are we doing about it? Is the issue? Is the concern?
And if that's the issue, if that's what you want to hear, then you want to hear from me.
Okay, let's go to you, Mr. Manager.
Well, I think that at the outset, let me say that it has been a concern. It has been a problem that the city has been dealing with for actually going back to 1999. And it has been a long-standing problem, and I'm glad to see that there's so much attention being paid to it now. This is something that...
Well, Mr. Manager,
this is
Mr. Manager, excuse me.
that Mr. Moses and I
understand you haven't been here for quite some
2006.
time, but when I was chair of audit and oversight, we discussed this. We have also discussed this on more than one occasion. So it's not just an issue that's come to our attention. It's not the first time.
I understand
Mr.
that.
Manager, it's not the second or third time we've talked about monthly reconciliations of the cash account. So with all due respect, please don't leave an impression that this is just becoming an issue now. We just
Well,
got
it's not becoming an issue now.
we
It's
just
been-
got
it's
the
been-
management report last week.
It's been an issue that's been ongoing, and it's been ongoing for 12 years now. And it's been, once you get into that situation, then it takes some time to dig yourself out of it. And it has been a priority of ours to try to work through that. And Mr. McGurl worked very diligently on solving that problem for us. And we're at the point now where he came very close to actually wrapping it up, so we did have full reconciliation. And we actually have another audit firm in right now, another accounting firm, that's actually completing the work so we address this problem once and for all, because we've gotten so close and we want to make that happen. And I think that from our standpoint, it is a very important issue. The reorganization was certainly intended to try to help deal with that problem. It did free up some of Mr. McGurl's time, and we're getting close. As I say, we're getting close to making that happen. Something that took 6 or 7 years to work in, beginning in 1999 and going up to 2006, 2007, it's going to take some time to pull yourself out of that, and that's what we've been working at as a priority. With regards to the management letter in general, I would point you to the work that has been done in clearing up the financial management system of the city. A tremendous amount of success has been made, and again, that's from my perspective. I'll let the independent auditor speak for himself and for his firm, but I think we've made tremendous strides, and we're
Mr.
well on our
Manager,
way.
can I interrupt you here?
Excuse me, if I could complete.
I would like to speak, and I like to focus on the material weakness in this report.
That is fine, and
and what
I'm
we're doing
concluding my
about it.
comments to that effect, that the other aspects have been addressed, but we are still working on that issue, and we're close to doing it. But I'm glad you did identify that the cash that we're talking about here is not the same as the cash policy that we're talking. I'm glad there's a full understanding of that. But I will turn it over now to others to address your concerns regarding the material weakness. And again, I think the audit firm is the best ones that can speak to that.
Well, Mr. Manager, you understand the process, I know.
I do understand
because
the process.
We're talking about things, whether it could be double postings. I mean, when these things, a double posting of account, is there reconciliation from the bank statements to the general ledger? Is the treasurer's books reconciling to the statements and the general ledger?
I
mean, there's so many things that could take place with all the transactions that occur
Literally thousands.
on a monthly basis.
Correct.
And we're talking about 1 to 3 years where there is still no reconciliation. So we don't know what it could be. Cash receipts, the list could go on and on. So when I say, we had a reorganization, and what happened? That's what I'm trying to get to. Why is this? You can understand from where we sit. We went through reorganization. I understand we lost the treasurer, understandable, but this is a long-standing problem. I mean, this is an issue that really needs to be addressed, and I want to hear what the solution is. I'm sorry, Council Broderick did ask
And the
to speak
reorganization, though, that took place just less than a year ago, and this completes up through FY10. We anticipate that FY11 will show the substantial progress that's finally making a dent in this long-standing problem.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Manager. Council Broderick?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I don't know the ins and outs, or I guess the details, and what this means and what's involved in it. Could somebody, perhaps the auditor, CFO, outside auditor, whoever, explain to me and for folks at home what this reconciliation, I think of reconciliation, I think of, I get online and I reconcile my bank statement or with my QuickBooks or whatever I'm doing, and it takes, hopefully not more than 15 minutes or else I'm chasing. But this is, it sounds like it's much more complex, number one, but could you explain the difficulty? We've met, I think, Madam Auditor, with you on a yearly review. We've gone through the management letter. You've described the changes that are in place and how we're addressing the management letter and improving things. I think each time we've taken a vote of work in progress and a report of progress and given you a very favorable rating on the job you've done. My question is, could someone please explain what has happened and what has to be done so that it sounds like, 2 or 3 years of trying to straighten this out is more than enough time, but I don't know what is required, what it involves, and what we've had for man hours on this thing. I thought we had an outside firm before helping initially, maybe a couple of years ago. I remember that from one of our meetings. I couldn't find minutes from our subcommittee meeting with the auditor for the last couple of years, but perhaps Madam Auditor or Mr. Moses could explain what this reconciliation process actually entails.
Well, actually, the auditor, Ms. Wright, mentioned 3 components. You can view this as kind of a 3-legged stool. There are the bank statements, there's the cash book, and there is the general ledger. Now, everyone understands what bank statements are, and most people understand that the general ledger is the accounting system that records all the transactions. The cash book is the one piece that's somewhat unique in municipal government, and it's important to understand what it does. It is really a running total that is supposed to be kept up day by day, which shows all the cash transactions, all the financial transactions that the city undertakes in summary. So, for example, if we have a check run, a warrant, all that whole check run is entered in as one number. And then as we get receipts or other things happen, those receipts are recorded in the cash book. The problem that we were having is that there are probably 60 bank accounts. And we were trying to reconcile them to the cash book. Well, the cash book since 1999 has probably not been maintained properly. All the transactions that occurred didn't get recorded, and some were recorded months, weeks, months, years later. So there wasn't a solid figure to reconcile the bank statements to. So that was the difficulty. Dave McGurl did a good job. He realized the limitations of the cash book as we had it and was attempting to reconcile the checkbooks directly to the general ledger. That is virtually impossible. We realized that, which is why Dave and I had conversations to hire a firm to come in and recreate the cash book. Now, we're going back several years. The firm is taking the approach that they will pick a point in time, isolate a difference, and then move forward from that time. In addition, they're replacing our QuickBooks cash book with an Excel spreadsheet to do the job better. It's a little more intuitive. So that's in process right now. Once that cash book is done, we can, on a monthly basis, reconcile to the general ledger. Without that cash book, it is virtually impossible to do so. What the firm did several years ago when we brought them in was to really get a handle on outstanding checks. We had checks that had been outstanding for years and years and years, and that, in fact, was on the management letter as well. The firm that we brought in actually did a lot of work, and we changed a lot of procedures, and we've better utilized what they call automated reconciling services directly from the banks for our outstanding checks. I don't think that is what's prohibited us from reconciling the accounts. It's more on the deposit end. So that's kind of a history of what has happened, what we're doing now, and the three-prong approach of reconciliation. The difficulty was the cash book. It had been so poorly maintained for so long that it was as if you were chasing a moving target. The other thing that the firm who is engaged now will do is put into place procedures to keep the cash book up to date, something we have not done. So with that, I mean, that's an overview. I think now the outside auditor can give his take, his evaluation on what we're doing to address their problem, to give you some comfort level on whether that's the correct approach. That's my suggestion.
If I could first.
Madam Auditor?
Sure. If I could first, what I'd like to assure you of is the fact that the general ledger is solid. It isn't an issue with the general ledger, okay? So payments out and revenue coming in, that is solid. The issue is with the cash book that translates between the general ledger and the bank statements.
How many items are outstanding? How many items do you still have to reconcile outstanding, and what is the value of those? So when you say this, the general ledger is solid.
Right.
I like to know how many outstanding items that you still have dating back to who knows when, and whether they have to be investigated. Because that's what this report says. You read the report, I can read it for
Of
you
course
if
I
you
read the
like.
report.
And I think what I was trying to get at is, we will never be able to recreate all of those. We're going to have to pick a point in time, draw the line, and make sure that variance doesn't increase or decrease from month to month.
What is that?
Because
What is
going
that
back and-
variance?
What is,
What is
the-
the variance? Between
I
the
think
treasurer's book
part
and the
is-
general
the
ledger?
part is, we don't know.
You have no idea what that
Right,
variance is.
Right, that's part of the problem.
That's not very comforting as I sit here and not knowing that we don't know what that
One of
variance
the,
is.
I need to make sure everybody understands too, we're not talking about variances in the amount of money that people owe us. Our receivables are reconciled to the penny. We know who owes what, whether they've paid, and that is not a problem. There is not a problem with any tax paying, any of that.
I have other questions, but any other questions, Councilor Hardwick?
Yeah, I guess the follow-up question then would be to either the CFO, the auditor, or maybe the outside firm is, what do we do next to, it's obvious, or it sounds like some of these things go back too far. We're not going to be able to recreate them. The people that were here that might have inputted them are not here any longer. There's no backup, whatever the situation is. We can only recreate so many things, and some of these are gone. So if that's the facts, if those are the facts, those are the facts. Now what do we do? What's the best practice moving forward? And are there recommendations from our outside auditor as to how to address this if it's not possible to recreate every transaction and make the cash book as if it was whole?
Okay, can I please get an answer to my question first? How many items are you still trying to chase down?
Right
And
now,
what is the value of that? I mean, you're picking a date, you don't know, so when are you going to go back to? 2003, 5? Have you determined that yet?
right now, Melanson and Heath is working on that.
Okay, do
That's
we,
what we've hired them.
again, do we have a number on that? Do we have a number? We have
don't
no
have
idea that number.
No,
Okay.
they're in the process of working on that.
Okay,
one half of 1% in terms of the number that would appear on the financial statements. And let's say a number that us as auditors could not tie into to the penny. We tend, with the balance sheet, to want to tie things in really to the penny, but we do have what we call materiality. And one half of 1% is well below what we call a materiality threshold that would cause somebody to not look at these statements and see something that would make them think otherwise about the City of Lowell's financial position. The fact that it's a material weakness is because after the first notification of it, you know, and you see it continue to come about, it is what we call a little systemic, meaning we don't know what's going on, but it's continuing. And so there has to be a flaw somewhere in the design. And the function of that design, at least when Mr. Moses was talking about the chair with the 3 legs, is 2/3 of that design resides in terms of the responsibilities of the treasurer's office. I know that the crosswalk that occurs between the city auditor's office and the responsibility of the general ledger to the treasurer is real. But I will tell you right now, the investment of the city auditor's office and the people in there coming over the top, what I would say across the table, to try to get the treasurer's office correct, is a lot more than you would see in a normal municipal environment. It's usually it's like a little card game, if I could just say. The treasurer does their job, and they say, this is what I've got. The ledger, the town accountant, city auditor does their job and says, this is what I got, and you figure out what the differences are. What I saw occurring, and I think this has been trying to occur, is there's been a little bit reaching over to try to pull the treasurer's office a little closer to where it needs to be. And that's what we've reflected on. So the city had over $65 million worth of cash. That doesn't include the retirement system. And that was just based on fiscal 2010's audit. So 0.1% is like $500,000. And the $500,000 is not money that's not around. But it's like I can't see a reconciling item and say, I know what that is, because there were too many variables. And what I think we're trying to suggest, we're suggesting in our note here, is that we have to eliminate those variables. And that was when we talked about weaknesses and controls over cash, realistically, and I think it was stated in the the fourth or fifth paragraph of our opinion, it said, we noted reconciliation procedures were not sufficient. And that's the key. And as the auditor, it's not our job to try to find out everything. That's for somebody else to do, and I know there's been efforts over the past few years to get that done. They haven't been as successful as we thought they would warrant to change the opinion, but there's been efforts there. I guess I just wanted to put a little levity to what it means to have a non-reconciled cash, or 3 accounts basically that weren't reconciled satisfactorily, and the materiality is a 0.5%, yes, 0.5%, which I don't suggest you should feel good about. But what I'm suggesting is that from the standpoint of, with all the thousands and millions of dollars that transpire and what ends up on the balance sheet at the end of the year, we always felt that there was enough going on from a standpoint of both sides trying to get it done, that it didn't have to get worse than the comments we have. We were not satisfied with the efforts, at least the results of the efforts, of the treasurer's office. And that's kind of like the focus of what this point was all about.
Mr. Sullivan, I appreciate your explanation, and I understand your point. But when I see a report by your company come out with the recommendations and the statements, you have to understand that there is cause for significant concern here. Particularly, and I just want to reference page 2, vendor payroll main depository accounts were not reconciled for any months.
That's correct.
Outstanding checklists were not reviewed or cleaned up in fiscal year 2010. Many account reconciliations, including reconcile items that are between 1 and 3 years old, have not been researched. So I don't know what 0.5% is, but to me it's got to be significant. However, many old reconciling items still exist. That's why I was asking the auditor for a number, or what the variance is, or the value of that, and we don't know. So
what you just read is exactly the systemic issue that we were talking about, because none of those things should go on for the duration they went on for. And the thing with particularly the vendor and the payroll account, there's an account called a zero balance account. And what that means is that the vendor account usually gets funded only to the amount of the warrant. So theoretically, after all the checks clear, it becomes back to zero balance. There's a reliance, and they talked about using banks to assist in that process. At times, we believe the treasurer's office was looking at the bank as being the sole responsible person for reconciling the account. The bank is merely a tool to help automate that process. The monitoring and the control that the treasurer is supposed to exhibit over every account doesn't relinquish itself when you begin using the banks. And that fell, I think, dramatically behind. So those 2 accounts, the vendor and the payroll account, were pretty much where all of the reconciling items and the kind of things we talk about with outstanding checks and things that were just hanging around for which no action had been taken place. It was those 2 accounts. And I believe, if I may be incorrect, and I hope that they may have actually changed bank accounts at one time to try to clean it up, kind of like, I can't figure this one out, so I'll let that one just funnel down, we'll start a new one. For whatever reason, it started again. So I'm not diminishing anything in there, because as an accounting firm, we feel a great responsibility to highlight material weaknesses, and they don't go through our internal controls easily. And I'm not trying to minimize anything in this letter, because there's nothing that should be minimized. But I just wanted to maybe help direct where I think the intent of the comment was, versus maybe a global statement on some of the cash receipts, because a lot of these reconciling items, I'll finish up. A lot of these reconciling items relate to what I call the disbursement cycle. The receipt cycle, we've always, as we've tested, have found to be pretty intact. I understand the issue and what it feels like, or what it must feel like, what happened in the clerk's office. But from the receipt cycle, we really never had from an audit standpoint, issue after our testing that revenues weren't being substantially reported in its entirety with decent accountability. These reconciling items are not deposits and transits. They're outstanding checks. They're checks that might have been voided but still on the outstanding checklist. There might have been a disconnect maybe between something that occurred in the general ledger versus the cash book, which I think is kind of a difficult concept to understand, but it's true. So they were more on the disbursement cycle side. And one of the things we did see, or have seen, because we test for this, we tried to find out whether double payments being made to certain vendors and so forth. We specifically tested for that. And I'm not going to say we tested everything because it's impossible, but our selection sample didn't lead us to believe any of that. So it's kind of like writing a check for $100 and putting $110 in your check register and not paying attention to your check register, thinking you have $10 less. And that's kind of a very simple example of what may or may not have been occurring, but certainly was not being addressed in any way, shape, or form as it relates to the two primary disbursements accounts of the city.
I understand, that's a good way to explain it. The issue is that it's been reported time and time again, so maybe that $10 or $110, given the fact that we don't know how many transactions we're looking at, and I understand you did your sampling, but the unknown is the concern, and what are we doing about it? You did list a number of recommendations in this report, and perhaps we can go through some of them. Councilor Broderick wanted to know, what are we going to do about it? I mean, there's clear recommendations in here. We spoke about the reorganization a little bit. One of the recommendations is that the city management evaluate the competency of the treasurer's office staff over the internal control structure. I would have presumed that would have been one of the issues that was addressed in the reorganization.
Correct. And again, that reorganization only took place less than a year ago, and obviously where we stand today is that that's certainly been affected by some personnel issues that we have in that office, in particular with regards to the treasurer, and we're close to hiring a new treasurer, and we hope to have an announcement on that within the next couple of days. But that is an issue. We need to have the right people in place in that office, the right training for the people that we have, and really ensuring that the procedures are followed completely. And I think on that front, if I may, Mr. Chairman, is that with the new treasurer hopefully in place by the end of this month, hopefully be able to report back to the council by the end of the year on an evaluation of that particular recommendation.
And what about the assistant treasurer? I know the individual is placed on leave. What is the status of that position?
That is
was his placement administrative leave relative to any of this?
No, it was not.
Okay. Councilor Broderick.
Thank you. Through the chair, Mr. Manager, or whomever, do we have any software issues? Do people have the tools they need to be able to do their job? I guess that'd be like, just to ask some pointed questions. Do they have the tools? Do they have the software? And do they have the training available? I know it's, who you hire has to have some experience. Do they have the training? And then do we have the personnel and the staffing? I know cuts have been made, so if you could address those three things.
I would say that the software is not a problem. I would say the training is one that is definitely needed. And again, that's been an ongoing issue that we've done training, and we just need to keep on doing that. With regards to the staffing, clearly that is an issue or has been an issue of concern. This was an office that has seen, I don't think it experienced any reductions. In fact, we added one person in with the assistant collector. No, that was a swap off, actually. So we haven't reduced the staffing over the last 5 years, but my memory isn't as good as it used to be. We did, and it had experienced some cutbacks before that as well. So I think there's a lot going on in that office, and what we've tried to do is contract much of the work out through the lockbox and through the motor vehicle, the deputy collector, and we've moved some of the parking collection or parking hearing responsibilities out. We're moving that out of that office as well, taking things out of that office so that they can focus on the tasks at hand. But we've been trying to do more in terms of automation, trying to do more in terms of moving responsibilities out to, or outsourcing those responsibilities.
Okay, because it doesn't, if we've reduced or maintained, I don't know how we could go back, recreate things, clear up old reconciliation issues with the same people and the same software and the same training and the same staffing, and do it the right way at the same time. I don't know, unless something else changed. It may be a problem of resources or training or something else. But let me just see if I have this, maybe a clearer understanding. It sounds like we're talking about maybe two different issues here. One is, what we can do to clear it up so we don't have a material weakness, and we in fact are reconciling currently. Are we currently reconciling everything? I assume that the answer is yes?
No.
Well, we still have to get the cash book in place before we can do that. Let me talk about what's happening now. Again, this firm, Melanson and Heath, is in here rebuilding the cash book, performing the cash reconciliation, and they were going to move forward several months to make sure that the procedure in place is working. That's number one. We do have training and experience issues in the treasurer's office. This is nothing new. You can gain the necessary experience by doing things correctly in an operation over time. You learn how to do things correctly, or you can go to school and obtain the skills through a accounting program in a college. At this point, without a treasurer, we have neither in the office. What we'd like to do is put the systems in place and hopefully get some of the staff to go to training in Amherst at the Treasurer Collector School, so that they're up to date. If they received the training last year without a reconciliation in place, without a monthly process that they were engaged in, the training would have been wasted because they wouldn't have used it. They would have waited for this to happen. We need to get current and train people. We have a staff that there's nobody around who's done the job well for the last 10 years, 11 years. That's not to say that they can't learn to do that job, but we need to get the tools, the cash book in place so that they can begin to use it properly.
Okay, I understand better then. So we don't have a system in place yet because to do it, we need to be ready to start so that we can train people and continue it forward. I guess that was what my roundabout or backwards question was.
And there is training available every year. They have, in the summer in Amherst, they train both the treasurer. There's a track for collectors and a track for treasurers. It costs a little money, and we're probably going to have to put it in the budget for 2013 to do this. So you can expect to see those expenses.
Okay. Last question, if I might, through the chair. When do we expect to have some type of response from the this firm we hired in terms of how to move forward? Where do we move forward from, and how are we going to move forward?
We've been talking with them as they progress, and I anticipate probably by the end of the month, we'll have something.
Okay, thank you.
Councilman Johnson.
Trying to put my head around all of this. So it sounds like all the deposits seem pretty well accounted for. The receipts coming in, you can reconcile those to pretty good effect, which means that when the city writes a check to someone and they don't cash it, that one needs to be reconciled. But so, I mean, when I do mine, that means that the bank thinks I have more money than I think I do. And so my question now is, what is the experience with these reconciliations that don't line up? Is that true, that generally the banks have a higher balance than we expect or lower?
From our audit experience, the bank has been, the money that is owned by the city has been higher than has been reported on the financial statements.
So what I said is true then, that the bank statements show a higher balance than we think we should have. Than our statements.
That's the assessment we came to after everything was done, and one of the reasons, I shouldn't say it's still a material weakness, but as an auditor who's put Powers and Sullivan's signature on this, I felt comfortable that, okay, we're presenting a conservative, more conservative positions of the city's financial position. That, from an auditor's perspective, is the better way to go than more of an aggressive position. So it is, I mean, I can't say what's going to happen after everything's done, but our assessment of, and we do a very detailed audit of cash because it's the biggest asset you have and the most subject to reporting issues. We had always come to the conclusion, or most of the time came to the conclusion, that the balance was higher, particularly when you're talking in the percentage I talk about. If it was, sometimes I think over the years the ledger has probably been a little higher, but not of anywhere near the magnitude of half of a percent. So on average, that's the way it's been. Balance.
So if we were to reconcile everything properly, would likely be
You could have
your
that.
statement, closer to your statement.
You could have that.
where we have more money than our own ledger may show.
That's correct.
Okay. So generally, yeah, so if somebody lost the check and never cashed it, we think we owe them money, but they never cashed it and we never hear about it. Eventually it needs to be voided, or we don't know what happened to it. Don't we on our checks write void after so much time? So after 180 days or 90 days, or do we know what it is?
Yeah, that's not the problem. I don't think people could actually cash those checks. I think one of the accounting issues is at some point we need to close the loop, and we actually wouldn't void the check in the system, because once you write a check, you assume that there's a valid reason for that. But if it goes uncashed over time, and we have to go through an incredible process to find and notify these people before we can do anything with it. But at some point, you exhaust those efforts, and the term that's used in municipalities is you bring it back in. You would actually bring it back in as revenue. That's part of the process
Right.
that we haven't been very good at.
So if you were doing a reconciliation, those would pop up as, these are the ones that haven't been cashed yet, then you can find out why, and whether they could be returned as revenue, or you need to issue another check and void the original, whatever needs to be done. Thank you for answering that. So, I mean, now it's a management issue of how do we deal with it going forward? And I guess one way is we could put it in FY13 budget, but this is FY 2010, actually, FY 2010 that we're doing. We've already completed 2011. We're into 2012. If we take care of this in 2013, we'll have at least another 3 years of this problem. So I'm hoping that the manager will work on a solution that will get us out of this sooner.
Right. Well, I think, as Mr. Moses said, the work of Melanson and Heath, and you know, you're correct. This does go back to 2010, which was 2009, 2010. And in 2011, it will be there again. And the management response will show progress, but it will be completed in 2012, the year that we're in right now, because of the work that, when Dave came on in 2008, he was fiscal year 2008, immediately began working on this problem because it had been out there for so long, and we were making progress, steady progress all the way through. But clearly, it's taken much more time than any of us would like. But we think we're finally at a point that within the next month we'll be there, and then we just have to make sure we stay with that. And again, getting the treasurer's position filled is going to be a key part of that, and then getting the necessary training. But I would say that in 2012 it will be solved.
Are we going to be able to get some notification from your office or the treasurer's office as, a month when it finally reconciles?
Mr. Moses?
We can certainly,
we'll
have a communication.
Right.
I just want to make sure that everybody understands that we have not been sitting on our hands. There are 100 small things that we've changed in the treasurer's office to make this process better. And I'll just explain one of them. When I got here, there were boxes and boxes of refund checks that our office held on to. What happens is most of the real estate refunds that get processed are because there's a property that's being transferred, bought or sold, and that both the buyer and the seller pay the taxes. And so the close of the year comes and there's a refund due. Well, we'd write a refund check and the treasurer's department would say, we're not sure whether the buyer or the seller is due this refund. So they'd put it in a shoebox and not send it out. And I said, that's ridiculous, and there's no way you can know. So when that happens, go back to the municipal lien certificate, find out which law firm handled the transaction, send the check to that law firm because they know who double paid. And so that's what we're doing. We've taken 100 steps like that, little things to make the process better. I just want people to know that.
So it may not show up in the management letter for a couple of years, but how close are we? Months, quarters of having this reconciled?
I think about 30 days.
30 days? All right, thank you.
We have some other items that we still have a little bit of time to go through, but I appreciate the fact that you have done 100 things, Mr. Moses, and but I also want to let the public know this is not a small matter, and I'm not suggesting that you think it's a small matter, because cash reconciliation, everything falls into cash reconciliation. The warrant, revenue, even free cash. So when we haven't conducted investigations, and again, it was highlighted. I'm just going by what I see. Although reconciling all items may not appear to be material to the overall financial position of the city, it may obscure significant but offsetting items, such as bank errors. Improperly recorded transactions. So I appreciate that maybe the general ledger sometimes is higher or lower, but it's of concern, and I'm glad we're hiring somebody to address it. What's the cost of that contract, Mr. Manager? What are we paying that from?
$50,000.
$50,000 to come in? Okay. Any other questions on this? And there were some prior year items that we all already spoke about, old outstanding checks. I think the auditor did touch on this in your opening statements, fraud risk assessment, and you indicated that the status that you sent out questionnaires. Can I just ask you, this has been cited in a number, this is a prior year comment, and it's been in previous management letters. I'd like to know why we haven't initiated this fraud risk questionnaire or policy. until recently?
It really wasn't an issue until '08 and that's when we started to do the assessment. We're doing this in phases, and it's an ongoing process.
Okay, but
It
you
will never be
indicated
done
you
completely.
just initiated it by sending out questionnaires. I thought that's what you said, maybe I was
That was the
wrong.
year before last that we started sending out questionnaires.
Okay, how come it takes so long for this? Isn't it just as simple as sending out a question to see, you know, which department? And of course, my concern naturally is, had this been done in the clerk's office, maybe that wouldn't have taken place, or we wouldn't have had those circumstances.
think
It
it was
was
done.
done in the clerk's office,
So we had responses back on this questionnaire,
yes.
and what were they?
And that there was a low chance or a low risk of fraud. So when you're dependent upon a department head, that's when you have
Okay,
issues.
so what has changed now if we're still going through that same process? Shouldn't we be doing something differently if it didn't work before?
We're going to department heads, we're going to staff, comparing the two.
Okay, I thought this was also going to staff. That's where you get questions and you get answers. That's where that's where you would find out about the weaknesses.
Went to department heads first, went to staff second, and comparing the two.
So it didn't go to the staff in the clerk's office. It just went to the department head.
Correct.
Okay. Any other questions on this? Could you keep us abreast on what the status of that item is? Because I think that's important. It kind of falls into my motion to have an independent audit firm come in and look at those other departments to see any weaknesses in other departments.
If I may,
Mr.
Mr. Chairman, I think that you've raised a good point about the staff. I think that it's important to note that in terms of the fraud risk, it's obviously, as the auditor has pointed out, and I think I mentioned something similar, that, you know, you depend upon the department head in these particular cases. But I think the fraud, the potential for fraud being reduced is evidenced by the fact that there was staff participation in this process to identify the fraud that occurred. And that's what we, you know, obviously depend upon that as well.
I think Councilman Johnson and then Councilor Broderick.
Actually, this is a good segue from the chairman's motion about the internal audits. In the management letter, there's a recommendation for that. And I know in our packet, we had a letter from the auditor basically asking the question, should you proceed with getting the costs of what that would be? And if my opinion is, yeah, we need to see the cost of what that would be. That's something the outside auditor is recommending be done, and something we think now should be done probably as well. So I think we should proceed to know what the cost of that will be and then decide whether we want to proceed or not. I don't know if the chair wants to handle this in a particular fashion, or,
Well,
we can
the
recommend
response
that.
of the manager is that they've hired a city staff individual, and I don't think that's what the intention of the recommendation. I don't think the individual, I don't know all of his qualifications, but I don't think they're looking for financial and audit, an individual that has some financial and audit background to conduct internal audits.
Well, it's actually, I think internal auditing actually covers a variety of things, including operations and financial data. So it's part of the process, but yeah, I would agree that it actually can be much more than that.
Now,
That's
as
fine.
I was reading this recommendation, it wasn't just the auditor's office conducting this auditor. This was an outside auditor doing these internal audits, further than they normally would go, is my
Right.
understanding.
I think we're talking maybe three separate things
Yeah,
here,
go ahead.
you know? When this is partially resolved, it's because of the city stat person that's looking at payroll and all that stuff, so that's why it's partially resolved. Originally, the auditing company had suggested we hire a new person out of the manager's office, I believe.
Internal audit function.
Correct. So obviously, the funds weren't available to do that, so between the city stat person and the fraud risk assessment was trying to bridge the gap.
Okay, so it sounds like this is different from
Well,
having an outside firm do the audit.
It's
Correct.
different
And
than
that's
the
the third-
cash, it's different than
And
the.
that's the third piece.
Right.
Counselor Elliott's,
maybe we could,
Right.
maybe Mr. Sullivan could answer all of our questions here. This internal audit function, the recommendation is essentially to have an individual, maybe to do things that I filed a motion where to have an individual go to all of the offices that accept cash, look at what the process is, the procedure, and to make sure that there have not been any, that there haven't been any vulnerabilities, there haven't been any missing money. So
An internal audit function usually reports directly to the highest level of the organization, council.
that's not something you would do, Mrs., when you came in to do your annual audit. You wouldn't go in to look at processes.
No, that's not something we would do. It's usually, it's a person who is a liaison or specific projects come up where you might want to look at how are things designed in terms of the cash policy, for instance. Is the design working? And if you have a design, are the procedures in place to support the design? And the third question is, are they following the procedures? So the internal audit function can be creative in the sense that we have to fix the problem because there's nothing there, or it can be a monitoring kind of process to determine, are the things that we think are right, in fact, being followed through the way they're supposed to be followed through. And that's an independent function that supplements the city auditor's office, but is usually a parallel process with normally direct reporting going to folks like yourself.
So in past audits, I can recall that you came back with recommendations to start provide receipts or ticketing for school lunches. How did you identify that if you wouldn't go down to that level? I think there were some other
Well, what
areas,
we
athletic
do is-
receipts.
We do site visits also as part of our audits. I actually, in preparing for this meeting, I went back and I've seen that we pretty much visited every office over the past several years. One of them being the clerks, and honestly, I couldn't find the documentation on that because I remember being part of that. But when we walk in and we're maybe testing, like for federal grants, we have to test school lunch receipts, breakfast, and we might see a process. We also, every year, come out and say there's certain things we want to look at as a firm, meaning that maybe we've seen a tendency of some of the food service areas, not to pick on food service, to be a little lax in the way we thought were good internal controls. And so we come out with a theme, not known to our clients, that we're going to be looking at certain things. So it can be based on something that we become aware of in the field, and it can be based on something that as a firm, we're just going to follow through, and this is going to be one of the things we're going to look at every single client that we audit this year. So it's a little bit of randomness. It could be a result of a selection sample for testing, and it could be a little bit of just coming upon it as part of our normal course of our work.
Okay, Council Mendonça, sorry.
Just trying to get a handle on this. You said it's the executive now. Actually, the executive in the city would be the city manager's office. He reports to the council.
That would
but
be fine, yes.
but we already have an auditor who does the auditing function for us. So I'm wondering how this meshes together.
I think it's
We implement this recommendation.
I think as Ms. Sullivan said, it's a bridge that, and I think we have actually had a partial resolution to this with the work that the data analyst is doing, works hand in hand with the auditor on addressing some of these payroll issues that we see and doing other internal audit functions. It's not a complete resolution, but I think we need to spend some time working on putting that in place and upgrading that.
So that could be grown to including these policies and procedures and cash handling, make sure that they're following the procedures. I mean, not necessarily counting the cash for them, but making sure the procedures are followed so that when it is counted, it'll be accurate. Is that
That's correct.
okay?
It could be, but again, it would have to be grown to do that. Right?
Okay, but then, so in order to address this internal audit function, something like that needs to be done.
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Council Broderick?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Excuse me. Other than the material change, there are a number of issues that have comments and suggestions, and I guess we don't have time to go through all of them, and I don't know if it necessarily would be, a good use of our time to go through each one. But I guess my question would be, are there priorities? How do we, Madam Auditor or Manager or whomever, or even Mr. Sullivan, how are we prioritizing these in terms of what, obviously, the material weakness is number one. That should be what we're working, putting our resources towards resolving. But what about these others? We have this handout that Mr. Moses prepared for us, but are there some things here that
With the indulgence, is it possible for Councilman Donster and I to get a copy of that?
Get a copy of,
The handout that Council Broderick has?
yeah. Here, you can have mine.
Don't have it. Councilman Donster doesn't have it either.
Yeah,
That was attached to the cover of the management letter that I handed out last week.
Must have missed Councilwoman Donster and I.
yeah, we do have it. Yeah, I thought it was just the cover.
All right, then it was just me. That's just
It was a coincidence.
that's just a coincidence.
Yeah, it was attached to the memo that was paper clipped to the letter, the management letter. So I guess the short question is, do we have some type of prioritization in terms of things that should be addressed more immediately than others? Some that, this internal audit function obviously is something that may require, we're talking about requiring maybe hiring someone or expanding roles and so on in the manager's office. That may not be then the same priority, or maybe it is, and we have to, allocate our resources. Maybe this is something that we have to start pulling into our strategic goals and planning with the manager. But Madam Auditor, I don't know if you could address that.
Absolutely. I look at anything that has anything to do with finances first, okay? That's what I look at. Then I look at what can I do immediately. If I can do it immediately, it's done immediately. And then I will parcel out my time so I can attack all these things one at a time. As you can see, over time, progress has been made on everything but actually the cash issues, which there's basically nothing I can do up to the point that I can do anything. But I think we've made a lot of progress. You can see from 2007 when I came on board, I went through and I wiped out as much as I could right away. Then as I did that, more issues kind of popped up because I took care of one set of issues. But when it comes to 2010, we're down to a bare minimum of what's left outstanding there.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay, so I'm not sure where we left off. Guess we could go to page 8. I don't think we're going to get to the investment policy. Maybe we will. Maybe we go down to the deposit investment policy. And again, previous management letters, GASB 40 required financial disclosure. Indicate the status policies that are in place are on an informal basis, and they did just put them. We did put them in place. Any questions on that, Councilman Donson, Councilor? I did have some questions on it. I did refer it to this. Who is doing the investing right now, Mr. Moses? It's the Master General Law delegates it to the treasurer, correct, to do that. So in the absence of a treasurer and assistant city treasurer, who is managing
We
the
have an
city's
assistant
investments?
treasurer. The position that's on administrative leave is the assistant collector. The assistant treasurer is still here and making the investments.
The
Assistant treasurer is still here and making the investments currently.
That's correct.
He's on administrative leave.
No, that's the assistant
That's the
collector.
assistant
Assistant
collector.
collector. So that
Right, that was
Okay.
part of the reorganization that we did, is we created the assistant collector's position to take those responsibilities, basically divide the collector and treasurer responsibilities in two, so that that collection function could free up the treasurer to work more readily with the assistant treasurer on the cash reconciliation issue.
okay.
So the investments are still taking place with the Assistant Treasurer, and I'm sure Mr. Moses is staying on top of that
Can you
as well.
explain, I did get the report, and I will find it. What is the philosophy? You know, there's $25 million in Century Bank, there's $25 million in Bank of America, there's, what is the policy? And then we do have other investments, so maybe you could just go through that.
The policy that we use is the same that's used for virtually every community throughout the Commonwealth, and it's called SLI, Safety, Liquidity, Yield, in that order. Make sure the money is safe. Make sure you can get to it when you need it. And after those two are satisfied, get the best yield you possibly can.
So is it possible for us to use local banks when it comes to those criteria? I mean, Bank
Yes.
of America, we clearly had some issues with Bank of America, and we did get money back from them, about $500,000 after we pursued them. But Century Bank, I mean, they have the bulk of the city's assets. Is there any reason why we don't use local banks for that?
The bulk of the assets at the current time with Century, because they were offering the best rate. That's why. And they beat local banks. But we do have a considerable amount of money in place with local banks. And in your packet this week is a proposal to increase that.
Okay, could you elaborate? I know that wasn't referred here, but maybe we should wait till it was referred there. Yeah, I think it applies. Yeah, as long as no one's gonna be upset. It is part of the investment. So, could you go through that proposal, Mr. Moses?
Well, that proposal is based off a similar program that was rolled out at the state level by the state treasurer, and it carves out a pool of our cash portfolio to be added to the local banks on the condition that they lend that money to Lowell businesses.
Okay, I'm sorry. Questions, Council Broderick?
Thank you. So we're going to put this money in their banks, and it's conditional upon and tied to their pledge to lend it to local business people?
Not only their pledge, they have to make an effort to market this availability as well and actually report back to us that they've placed that money in loans.
Yeah. How much are we talking?
I believe it's, I don't have it in front of me, it may be an additional $2 to $4 million per bank. Now, the bank has to qualify under our investment policy for safety. Obviously, if a bank is going under, we're not going to give them deposits, but we have local banks here that qualify, and we actually do business with now.
Okay, and how is it determined how it's going to be parceled out? I assume that many of the local banks, they're all very stable and doing very well. They might want to participate. Is this going to be RFP, RFQ? How do they work?
No, actually, all they have to do is sign an agreement with us that they will lend it out, agree to all the reporting requirements, and we will move the money from other banks into those banks.
Great, thank you.
Any other questions on that? No? Let me also recognize the mayor is here, and Council Rita Mercier, Councilor Patrick Murphy. I don't have any other questions at this point. I think the next thing to do is to recess to a later time. Mr. Manager?
Mr. Chairman, if I may suggest that I think it's important that we certainly welcome the opportunity to update the council, to update the Finance Subcommittee on this. Might I suggest we indicated in an earlier comment that we'd be bringing a new treasurer on within the month. and then have them do their assessment and be able to come back to the council by the end of the year. So what it might suggest is take this issue up again so that we could update you on some of these matters sometime in the late November, early December timeframe.
Okay,
So
that sounds good.
I'll move for recess so that we can take up the management letter issues
Second.
at a subsequent meeting.
Okay. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? So ordered. Motion to adjourn by Council Broderick, seconded by Council Mendonça. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Any opposed? So move, or we will recess, excuse me. Let me thank you, Mr. Sullivan, for coming and answering a lot of questions for us, Mr. Moses, and Cheryl Wright, the auditor, Mr. Manager. Thank you for coming. Meeting is recessed. Thank you.